My castaway this week is a politician, a poet and a classical scholar. He was a member of the House of Commons for 37 years, first as a Conservative and then as an Ulster Unionist. Always admired for his intellect and eloquence, he never held high office. On issues such as the Common Market, Northern Ireland and immigration, he expressed opinions which alienated him from many of his colleagues. His isolation, however, often seemed to be a source of strength. His lack of office never undermined his influence. Now, 77, he can look back on a career in which he has been criticised as an extremist and hailed as a sage. Whichever view you take, there can be no doubt that he has remained true to himself, Enoch Powell. Not always true, though, Mr. Powell, to the name your family knew you by best. You were called John throughout your childhood, weren't you?
That's right, yes. I was given 2 baptismal names after my respective grandfathers. But the reason why Enoch superseded John is really a very mundane one, and it's one which nobody would have guessed. I had ambitions in my teens to be a classical scholar, and I saw myself producing the definitive edition of Thucydides, rather a presumptuous attitude for a schoolboy. And one day, it must have been when I was 16 or 17, I came across a copy of a classical review in which an article on Thucydides had been written by an Oxford scholar by the name of J. U. Powell. Heavens, said I to myself, we shall be confused. I must differentiate myself from this fellow, whoever he is, who is writing about Thucydides. So for the first time I spelt Enoch in full, and that became my check signature, and that became my permanent signature.
Well, now, how do you view the idea of being cast away on a desert island? Do you view it with relish or dismay?
I think it's cruel of you to do this and probably leave me there for the few remaining years of my life. It's a cruel fate because man is a social animal, and to take him and put him with whatever conveniences and commodities in isolation is an affront to his humanity. And in selecting music for your purposes, I have selected that to which I would look for long-enduring pabulum on which I could feed both my intellect and my emotions.
What is the first of your music pieces?
Well, it's bound to be Wagner. As far back as I can remember, I've been under the influence of Wagner, and I wrote poetry under the influence of Wagner, and I was saturated with Wagner in my earlier years, though no longer. And the Ring, after all, is a gigantic work in the sense that a whole cycle of thought and of events, a moral cycle and an intellectual cycle, is lived through as you witness and hear it, so that would be something to live on. So I'd like to hear something from each of the 4 parts of the Ring. And from the first part, from the Rheingold, I would like to hear the entry of the gods into Valhalla, the moment at which the hollowness of the achievement of the gods is exposed by the Rhine maidens drawing attention to the fact that it's all based on a fraud, it's all based upon deceit, so that the plot and the moral plot of the Ring is laid down.
The entry into Valhalla from Richard Wagner's Das Rheingold, with the Vienna Philharmonic conducted by Sir George Solti. You were, I'm sure, Mr. Powell, a very bright child. Did you constantly carry off all the school prizes?
I'm afraid so.
Both your parents were teachers, weren't they?
Both my parents were teachers professionally, yes, and my mother was my first teacher. I can remember standing by her as she worked in the kitchen, and she had the alphabet on the walls, fixed up on the walls, and I can also remember her rewarding me for reading from Standard 3 readers by a story out of Standard 4 readers. But she was the person who first taught me Greek, for she had taught herself Greek in her youth in Newport, Shropshire, at the college there.
Were you popular at school?
I wasn't conscious of being unpopular, and certainly I enjoyed the company of my schoolfellows.
Did you have a nickname?
Well, I had a nickname at the secondary school, which I attended before I went to King Edward's Grammar School, and that was Scowly Powley, owing to my habit of frowning, which I think I probably still have.
Why do you think you frowned so much?
Everyone has facial habits and characteristics, and mine was a contraction and furrowing of the brow. I needn't explain it or apologise for it further.
I presume it was then without question that you would go up to Oxford or Cambridge.
To go with a scholarship or bursary to Oxford or Cambridge was a natural expectation of those in the upper sixth form at King Edward's, Birmingham.
And in your case, it was Cambridge, it was Trinity College, to read Greek, and indeed to win a double first. Shall we leave you there for a moment and have your second piece of music?
I'm going to indulge myself with something really human, with the spring song in the Valkyrie, where, as Siegmund and his sister are together, the door bursts open, and there's nobody there. And Siegmund says it is the spring that has burst in.
Winterstürme wischen im Wonnemond, in mildem Lichte leuchtet der Lenz. Auf linden Lüften leicht und lieblich, wunderwebend sich wiegt. Durch Wald und Auen weht sein Atem, weit geöffnet lacht sein Auge. Das selige Vöglein sang es süßen Wind, alle Düfte haucht aus, seinem warmen Blut entblühen wonnige Blumen, Keim und Spross entspringt seiner Kraft.
Siegmund's Spring Song from Richard Wagner's Die Walküre, sung by James King with the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Sir George Scholti.
Isn't that a wonderful expression of the truth, that at its climax, human affection and human love has this sense of being in tune with nature, surrounding nature. It's marvellously expressed and conveyed in that song.
Can you remember, Mr. Powell, when you first fell in love?
Yes. Yes, I remember that. But I'm not telling.
But you've written about it in your poetry, haven't you?
Yes, I've written about it, so I don't need to tell. I've written about it, therefore, in the way in which it should alone be written about.
So there are times when your heart has ruled your head.
I'm not sure that my head is ever wholly intellectually controlled. I think the power behind my use of my intellect is of an emotional character. And I think that there's a strong pent-up force of emotion which drives me even when I appear to be most in search of a logical answer to an intellectual question.
We left you just now at Cambridge, and I don't want to entirely leave you there. Can we just talk about the time when you were there? Can you describe what kind of young man you were then? Were you studious or social? Were you ambitious? Or
absurdly studious. I used to observe my contemporaries, who were nearly as good as I was at Latin and Greek, and wonder how it was that they had so much else as well that I hadn't got, which was no doubt one of the reasons why my elder daughter was put down for Eton before she was born, because I believed that they had brought something from school, besides the knowledge of Latin and Greek syntax, which I hadn't brought. And it took me a long time to learn to benefit from and enjoy the society of an institution. I really only learnt it as a fellow later on, after my degree, when I became a fellow of Trinity. As an undergraduate, I was a learning machine.
Which began at 5 o'clock in the morning, I think.
I used to get up at 5 to work on my translation of Herodotus. I did an hour and a half before an early breakfast on that.
Let's have some more music.
I want the forging song, because in the forging song, Siegfried is asserting his independence. His teacher, the dwarf Mima, has tried to show him how to forge the broken parts of a sword together. And Siegfried says, I'll never do it if I listen to you. I have to do it for myself. I have to do it in my own way. And that is the creative independence which the forging song asserts and triumphs in.
The forging song from Wagner's Siegfried, sung by Wolfgang Windgassen with the Vienna Philharmonic, conducted again by Sir George Solti.
It was, after all, the defiant independence and self-made nature of Siegfried which made it possible for him to annul the curse which Wotan could not annul. And that's what I want, when you allow me again, to follow to its triumphant conclusion in the Götterdämmerung.
How much has music meant to you during the course of your life? Is it something you've played frequently, the Ring in particular?
Up to the war, it was enormously important. In fact, as a schoolboy, I thought that I would probably be a professional musician. But after the war, I kept away from it.
Why? Because it moved you too much?
I suppose I am a bit afraid of it. But also, having anticipated the war as I did from 1934-5 onwards, and having regarded my existence as only provisional until it came, and having, when it did come, with such joy and relief taken part in it, I emerged, to my surprise, into a full span of human existence. It was a different world to me in that sense, that I had not lived before in a world other than a world terminable by catastrophe. And here was a world which went on forever, a normal world.
Because you had sensed war coming and you believed you were going to die in it?
I assumed I would be killed in it. That was a natural assumption. After all, the average expectation of life of an infantry officer in November 1918 was 3 weeks, and as I was determined to be an infantry officer, I assumed that that was what would happen. And I suppose I've been lastingly ashamed of myself, but it wasn't what happened.
Can you remember the moment at which you realised you were not going to die, that you were one of the survivors?
Yes, it's very vivid. It was a moment in 1944. I was in India, and it was the night that the monsoon broke, and I did what everybody else does on the night that the monsoon broke. I walked out from under the veranda and stood in the rain and got soaked. And I suddenly said to myself, what are you going to do then? The chances now are that you will survive. So what are you going to do? That there will be a life, a world after the war. What are you going to do? And it happened to me, as I think it happens to most people, when what externally seems to be a major decision is taken. You don't actually take the decision was there. It's like hearing a knock on the door, and you open the door and there's somebody standing on the doorstep. And what was standing on the doorstep was, you will go into politics.
You've said since that you would like to have been killed in the war. Why do you say that? Is that all to do with the shame and the guilt?
I think this is a sense commonly felt by those who served, but from whom life was not demanded in the war.
But was that not very hurtful to your family to have heard you say that?
I'm not conscious that my daughters were terribly shocked.
And your wife?
My wife, I think, tended to take it personally. But wives do, don't they?
I think I can understand that she would.
But I'm not thereby seeking to invalidate anything that I've done or tried to do, or been imagined to do, since 1945. It's simply that a mark is placed upon men, not merely by service in the armed forces, but by emerging from the war. And it's a mark which I think they bear for the rest of their days.
Shall we now then have your fourth piece of Wagner? The Renunciation of Siegfried from Wagner's Götterdämmerung, sung again by Wolfgang Windgassen, with the Vienna Philharmonic conducted by Sir George Scholti.
You see, the Rhine maidens thought he was a fool. They couldn't understand that he had done the greatest thing that a man can do. They couldn't understand that he'd solved the underlying riddle of the ring itself, that he'd broken the curse by defying it, by giving up his own life, by throwing his life away.
You never, as I said in your introduction, achieved very high office. Have you analysed that for yourself? I'm sure you have. I mean, can you explain to yourself why a man of your intellect and your standing, who commanded so much respect, never quite achieved the height of office that he might have expected?
Well, at that level, office is a lottery, and certainly the highest of all offices is more a lottery than the other offices. But at any stage in my career, there was a price that I was not prepared to pay for improving my chances in the lottery. And I don't say this is simply a self-description. I'm not criticizing others who regard it as a game which is played for office, and where the considerations, the governing considerations, are of success in the game. I have no objection to people who play a game and play it according to the rules. But my disposition was, in the last resort, I suppose, to make my own rules.
It must nevertheless have been, and perhaps still is, a source of enormous frustration to you.
No, it doesn't must. You're not talking to a frustrated man. You're talking to a man who admittedly lost his place in the assembly where for 37 years he had been happy and in that sense fulfilled. But you're also talking to a man who, in losing it, has missed his constituency more than he misses the House of Commons, and who is finding to his astonishment that his mind remains active, acquisitive, critical, and defiant as his years decline.
We'll pause there, shall we, and have your fifth record.
Well, certainly I did give you rather a surfeit of Wagner, and I'm not suggesting that I would wish to live with nothing but Wagner on my desert island. I would want to go back behind Wagner to where Wagner came from. I would particularly want to take plenty of Beethoven with me, and I would take it for pleasure as well as for its connection with Wagner and the music drama. But first of all for pleasure, and I want something from the Pastoral Symphony, please.
The final movement of Beethoven's Symphony No. 6 in F major, the Pastoral, with the Vienna Philharmonic, conducted by Karl Böhm. I'd like now, Mr. Powell, if we may, to talk about the speech for which, for better or for worse, you are most famous, and that, of course, is your 1968 speech on immigration. You were calling for the immediate reduction in numbers of immigrants coming into Britain and for the repatriation of those, or many of those already here.
That was official policy of the Conservative Party at the time.
Then why were you sacked by Ted Heath for saying it?
Because he didn't like the fact that it had been heard. It was the tone, not the content. He never claimed that the contents were incompatible with the policy of the party. He disliked the tone.
He said it was racialist in tone.
He disliked the tone. It's significant that the word tone was used, and after all, we're talking about a musician.
It's perhaps not surprising he didn't like the tone. He talked about the indigenous population not being able to find hospital beds to give birth to their children.
I didn't say that. You're not quoting. You're saying what you think I said. You will not find that.
They found their wives unable to obtain hospital beds in childbirth, their children unable to obtain school places, their homes and neighbourhoods changed beyond recognition, their plans and prospects for the future defeated.
Yes, I'll stand by all that. It was a description of the circumstances in which many hundreds of thousands of people were already living, and many more hundreds of thousands were shortly to find themselves living.
Would you have said it if the people who were using up those places and destroying those hopes and aspirations of the indigenous population, would you have said it if the people coming in were Italian or French, that is to say, did not have different coloured skin?
Yes, indeed.
So you would deny the attack that people often make against you, that you are racist?
Well, I always invite them to define the word. If you define it, I'll say yes or no.
I would presume that it would be, in this case, someone who was not desirous of having people living alongside an indigenous population because of the colour of their skin.
Well, if it turns upon colour, then I shall return a negative. But for the rest of your question, I do not believe that, for example, the Indians wish to see 40 million Europeans moving into the Republic of India, into the Union of India. And that's the relative proportion.
Going back specifically to the Rivers of Blood speech, as it was called, of 1968, really the thrust of your speech was, if one can describe it as almost an apocalyptic vision of a nation in turmoil because of the growth of immigrant communities, a tremendous upheaval and an eventual overrunning of the one by the other, of the indigenous by the immigrant.
Something which can only accurately be described as civil war, yes. And I still regard that as the prospect.
So you have, quite obviously, no regrets whatsoever about making that speech. Even though, as Michael Foot has written, he wrote, without that speech, the Tory kingdom would sooner or later have been yours to command. You had, he said, all the shining qualities that the others lacked.
Well, that's very nice of Michael to say that. And I'm an admirer of Michael Foot, and I was sufficiently an admirer to suppose that he would make a great success of being leader of the Labour Party. I was sorry and disappointed that it didn't work out that way, and I think he would have been disappointed as to his prophecy and prediction if that speech had never been made.
Shall we have some more music?
What I would like to hear again is the moment in the Ninth Symphony in which Beethoven moved from music into words, because that's a great moment in the history of European culture, and it's a great moment in human history, the transition from the musical, from music and dancing, to words and poetry.
Part of the final movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony with the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra and chorus conducted by Hans Schmidt-Isserstedt. You, going back to your career, you shocked your colleagues yet again in 1974 when you left the Tory party on the common market issue, and you advised people to vote Labour. You, a high Tory, as I think you would admit.
Well, they
to being.
shouldn't have been shocked. They were only shocked because they hadn't been listening. They hadn't been listening to me saying for years there are some issues which override party, and one issue which overrides party is the independence of a nation, which I believed then and believe now, though I've been joined by others in the meantime, is endangered, indeed is sacrificed by Britain being part of the European Economic Community.
But why couldn't you have just demonstrated that, your opinion, by leaving the Tory party, to go on and to advise people to vote against the party that you had grown up in and believed in?
Well, here was I, no longer a candidate, no longer a member of the Conservative Party, which I'd ceased to be when Parliament was dissolved on the 8th of February, and I said to myself during that campaign, in which the Labour Party, you will remember, was placing before the electorate a manifesto of which the implementation would certainly have taken Britain out of the European Economic Community again. It seemed to me that I had to say to the electors, you now have a choice, and if you value the choice, which parliamentary elections give you, then you will take it by taking at face value what you are offered.
You then did something else later that year, in 1974, which was seen as extraordinary at the time. You decided to go and stand for Parliament as the member for South Down.
Well, I didn't actually decide to go and stand there. What happened was that the Ulster Unionists came to see me and said, "Will you come and join us?" They said, "You've supported us and helped us during the last Parliament when you didn't need to, when you were a member for an English seat. Now we're in a hung Parliament with great opportunities open to us, with 11 members in this Parliament. We need your help. You won't leave us now, will you?"
So it was love of the Unionist cause, not love of the House of Commons, that made you do it, was it?
Well, I wouldn't have accepted the invitation to stand if I'd hated the House of Commons, but I did not seek the invitation, and the invitation came to me as a consequence of the way in which I had spoken and acted and voted during the Parliament which ended in February 74.
Let's have your 7th piece of music.
It's Beethoven again. And you know, his music was better than his politics. In listening to and enjoying Fidelio, one enjoys it as music without necessarily assuming that Beethoven in politics would have acted up to what he's saying in Fidelio.
The Prisoner's Chorus from Beethoven's Fidelio, with the Philharmonia Opera and Chorus conducted by Otto Klemperer. Your image, Mr. Powell, is quite a stern one, a frowning one, as you were saying earlier, a slightly sinister one on occasions, if I may say, and yet you're patently a man of great romanticism and great passion and great wit. Do you find, as you go about your business, that people have the wrong impression of you?
People, and particularly children, react quite favourably to me. I get on well with children, and they evidently get on well with me.
I wonder how your family would describe you. I mean, do they think of you, do you think, as the old tyrant, or are you the doting grandfather, or both?
Oh, tyrant they could not have thought me to be. If there is a tyranny in the household, it doesn't come from the father's side. And then it is a mild tyranny. No, I don't believe that, in retrospect, my 2 daughters will regard me as having been overbearing.
And how would your wife describe you?
There must be adequate reasons for tolerating someone as she has tolerated me for 37 years. There must be some compensations.
Shall we have your last record?
I'd like to end with something good, and I'll explain to you in a moment in the sense in which I'm using the word good. I want to hear the aria In Native Worth and Honour Clad from Haydn's oratorio The Creation. I enjoy it because when I hear Haydn, I always feel that I'm in the presence of a good man, a person of a good moral, religious character, and I do enjoy being with Joseph Haydn.
lebendigen Seele.
Francisco Araiza singing the aria In Native Worth and Honour Clad from Haydn's Creation with the Vienna Philharmonic conducted by Herbert von Karajan. Is it possible for you to say which of those 8 pieces of music you prefer to any of the others? It's very difficult.
Well, you're putting me up against difficulty, and I daren't grab the ring as a whole, so I think I've got to settle for the supreme moment in the ring, and that is Siegfried's renunciation.
The Götterdämmerung.
In the Götterdämmerung.
And a book we would like to know from you. You've got the complete works of Shakespeare and you've got the Bible.
Yes. I don't know which Bible I've got, though.
Well, I think you can choose.
Oh, thank you. Because I will need a Greek Testament. I will need a Greek Testament in order to continue to apply my mind to it. And you can only do that in Greek, the language in which it was written. And I suppose that if I'm opting for a Greek New Testament, I may as well opt for a Hebrew Old Testament, for I would flounder around in that helplessly. And I don't flounder in Greek, but I flounder in Hebrew.
But beyond that, there's no other book you'd like to have?
No, I shall be satisfied with those.
Right. And your luxury?
I believe it's technically called a smoker. You put fish into it and it comes out a smoked fish. Now, I reckon there's some chance on your magic island that the barracuda makes a mistake and flops down on the beach, and I would like to be able to smoke it, for I have an absolute passion, not merely a passion for fish, but a passion for smoked fish. I could eat fish at every meal. There must be something about the genes derived from a remote period in humanity's history when we lived by the seashore and lived only on fish. Anyhow, the genes lodged powerfully in me. So a smoker, please.
All right, you shall have one. I suspect it's slightly against the rules, but I feel I can't deny it. Thank you very much indeed, Enoch Powell, for letting us hear your Desert Island Discs.